Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dahlgren Chapel of the Sacred Heart, the spiritual heart of our Georgetown community. This chapel was built in 1893 and was centered at the historic kind of center of campus at the time. My name is Father Mark Bosco. I'm the Vice President for Mission and Ministry here at Georgetown. And this evening, I'm honored to inaugurate a new Dahlgren Chapel series called Faithful Conversations, Business, Faith, and Justice, co-sponsored with the McDonough School of Business's Barata Center for Global Business. This series features a conversation with a prominent business leader on how religious faith and the Jesuit values of Georgetown University have helped shape them professionally and personally. We are so honored to have James Farley, Georgetown class of 1985, with us this evening. A global leader in the car industry, I first met Jim in London when he was in charge of the Ford Company's European division, and have since had the chance to meet with him in Detroit as president and CEO. I was quite taken with Jim's journey after leaving Georgetown, especially in the way he speaks about how his time here at Georgetown helped set the stage for the kind of leader he espouses to be, both as a professional and a man committed to a faith that does justice in service of the common good. Much more can be said of Jim's many accomplishments, and I refer you to the program for a fuller resume. But I especially want to highlight Jim's leadership in an iconic business navigating the new technologies of the electric revolution in the automotive industry, always aware of the moral imperatives of environmental sustainability. We know, of course, that Georgetown and throughout the Catholic world and throughout the world in general, this has been articulated, this call by Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, the care for our common home. Joining us in this evening's conversation with Jim is Father Quentin Dupont, the Swan Family Assistant Professor here at McDonough School of Business. Father Dupont teaches undergraduate courses in finance and on the role of the common good in corporate governance and in financial markets. Before I invite them both up to take their seat with me, and since we are hosting this conversation in a chapel, I want to offer a prayer for curiosity. I have chosen this prayer after a Zoom conversation with Jim a couple of months ago when he spoke about the virtue of curiosity as essential for future leaders of tomorrow. So let's take a moment to bow our heads in prayer. Good and gracious God, we pray for the gift of curiosity. Give us open minds and open hearts. Release us from the cynicism that pervades our world and shake us free from the rigid categories of life. You, O Lord, make all things new. You offer us new life through the resurrection and nurture in us the creation of a hope-filled future. Provide us, Lord, with a holy curiosity. Remind us of the power of the gospel so that our curiosity reveals you in ways we have never seen before. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. I now invite Jim and Father Quentin to join me up here. And before we dive into the Q&A, I'm actually going to have Jim speak and offer some personal reflections.
Hi, everyone. This is a different situation than I'm accustomed to be in this chapel. Just as context for our discussion today, I wanted to highlight, well, first of all, I hope there's a lot of great questions from the audience. And no, not everyone gets a free Mustang today. First thing I would say is, if you went back to 1957 and you looked at the 500 companies on the S&P, 500 companies, 56 remain. 90% of all the companies on the S&P in 1957 are gone. Not went bankrupt, they don't exist. And came back, they don't exist. 90%. Ford has been in existence for 123 years now. It's one of the rarities. It's very, very rare in business to be that enduring. What's even more interesting to me is that in the 60s, a company on the S&P would last about 60 years, and that is now down to 20 years. So I guess what I would say is there are no guarantees in business. And actually, the older you are, the more vulnerable you are. The last statistic that is very humbling for me as a leader, in 2008, 85% of all cell phones were made by 3 companies: Nokia, BlackBerry, and Motorola. 85%. 5 years later, that same 85% was shared between 2 companies, basically Google and Android-based smartphones and Apple. In 5 years, that industry, high technology, and by the way, all the dominant players, Nokia, Motorola, BlackBerry, they had the best engineers, they had all the resources, and in 5 years, they all lost. What we're going through in the auto industry is the same. The only difference is it's very hard for Google to make tanks and planes. Our industrial base in this country is very, very important for our national defense. Our industry, our defense industry, is not big enough in peacetime to maintain its ability to defend the country. And that's why you saw the government support General Motors and Chrysler's bankruptcy, because our industrial base in the country is so important for our own defense. And so this transition for us and General Motors, who did go bankrupt, is very important for our country's self-defense. Because without the auto industry and other industrial companies like us, we won't be able to defend ourselves. I just say that because our company is going through the largest transition we've ever had, even since Henry Ford came out with the Model T. And incidentally, Elon Musk's strategy on Tesla is literally Henry Ford's playbook. Exactly Henry Ford's. You know, at the end of the Model T, Ford almost went bankrupt. We were within 2 years of going bankrupt. But Henry Ford's son, Edsel Ford, convinced him to do a new model called the Model A. But Henry Ford was so convinced that democratizing the price of the Model T would overwhelm the lack of emotional interest in the vehicle. So as the Model T became a rational product and had 70% of global market share, Chevrolet came along, gave people colors and a 6-cylinder engine and better design. And Henry Ford almost bet the whole company against bringing the price of the Model T down fast enough to tempt people in to buying an out-of-date product. Sounds familiar when you go to a lot of suburbs in the US and all you see is Model 3 and Model Ys, and they look like appliances that happen to be cars. I say that not to say anything about Tesla, just there is some truisms about these transitions in technology. And one of the truisms is that most of the established players don't make it. So literally the stakes are high for our country. Same token, the chips are kind of against us at Ford. And I just want to set that context before we have our discussion.
Thank you, Jim, very much, yeah. Maybe we come back to what inspired you ultimately to be in this line of business. You give us the dates when you were here, and what was going on in the world around you at that time. What was life as a student like?
Yeah, it was probably similar to most students, awkward, trying to find their place in the world. It was a really exciting time to be at Georgetown, in retrospect.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan got elected while we were here. I remember going to one of the inaugural balls. The banking industry was being deregulated. I worked at IBM across Key Bridge. I also worked for a congressman on the Hill. It was a time when most of Georgetown's student body was from like New Jersey, New York, or Washington, D.C., or Connecticut. We were all pretty much the same. We had similar backgrounds. And I couldn't meet one person at Georgetown who wanted to be in the car business. So I was just a total oddity. I like cars. Most of my friends didn't care about cars. They You know, they were just transportation. And that included my father. He was a banker. You know, I would get in trouble for watching a NASCAR race at home. So I guess, you know, at Georgetown, I had a 1965 Mustang, and, you know, I drove it across the country without my license or insurance when I was 15. And
15.
yeah, and my parents didn't know. Back then, an airline ticket, I know this is going to sound strange for the students, but back then an airline ticket was cash. So I traded in my airline ticket to buy the gas money to drive across the country. But no, it was a really exciting time to be here at Georgetown. We were all kind of the same in a way, kind of blinded by that in a way. And if you would have asked me back then, you would be the head of Ford Motor Company, I would have said, zero chance, zero, zero. Why I wanted to go into business is I didn't think I should. When I was at Georgetown, you know, everyone kind of, you know, we were all kind of aimed at the same goal. And I always loved cars. And pretty much all 4 years I was here, I kind of buried that. It wasn't until later that I decided to go in the car business. I worked for IBM after graduating. And I loved cars, but I was fearful that my love of cars would be ruined if I went in the car business.
Earlier in Father Mark's office, you were mentioning an iconic tile company in Detroit, and you are the leader of an iconic worldwide company, right? Everybody knows Ford. I grew up in Europe. I grew up hearing about Ford. Everybody knows Ford. Like you said, it's a 120-plus-year-old company, and you're the leader of it. You've talked a little bit about your time at Georgetown 40-some years ago. How does this education, this Catholic Jesuit education you've received here at Georgetown, how has that formed you, shaped you to be the kind of leader you are now? Can you help us trace a little bit of an arc from those early values that you learn here and how they make you who you are today as a business leader?
Yeah, I would say empathy. It wasn't like I did a bunch of social work when I was at Georgetown, but many of the Jesuits that I met here and my friends, they all seemed to be very empathetic people. That was more the kind of ambiance. But I believe the biggest impact is what you said, Father, which was curiosity. I really learned from the Jesuit kind of way of thinking. I had a Jesuit teacher from my philosophy class, and I found it so kind of, at the beginning, disturbing and then exciting that he was teaching philosophy and theology, because his faith was so clear that he had chosen to follow this life of faith, and yet he was teaching belief structures that had nothing to do with his choices. That sense of curiosity is the most important thing I have learned from a connection. I am a just total pain in the fill in the blank because I am so curious about a better way of doing something or an alternative view. I think that Jesuit ethos, because I went to a Benedictine high school, very dogmatic, very practical, and not very curious. When I came here, it was so different that I found that curiosity. I mean, I had Jan Karski, who was a professor here. He had gone through the Holocaust. He was an early leader against Nazi ethos, the belief structure. And I got to go to school to listen to someone like that. That ability to kind of get a different point of view that was so different than how I was raised, I think is maybe the truth in my business career. I never took the easy way out. Anytime someone said, well, that job is super risky, probably won't work out, but it'll be super interesting, I always went that direction. Every time. And people thought I was nuts to take on the jobs I did. But it was because of the curiosity that I saw in play here.
So, speaking of priests who teach things that are slightly different from their belief systems, I teach finance.
Okay.
So, my Jesuit colleagues who teach in the theology department remind me that Jesus said you cannot worship both God and mammon. That's their usual way to greet me in the morning. But one of the things we talk about in particular in a seminar I have for freshmen, fall semester freshmen, so brand new, they arrive here, and some of those students are here actually from earlier classes. I hope they ask you some good questions. One of the key themes of that seminar on finance and the common good is precisely the role that common good plays in financial markets, in financial decision making, in all business decision making, really. I mean, you can't do business if you don't do finance. How would you say the common good impacts your decision-making process, if at all? I don't mean to put you into hot waters here, but is this something that you think about it, or is this something that enters your thought process, or how you relate to colleagues, or?
It's a great question, and it's actually one that I wish would be more focused on, because I really look at business as doing all this economic good if it's run well. But I'm lucky I work for a family company. The Ford family has only been 4 people to ever lead the company that have a last name Ford, Bill Ford being the last. And so common good is like one of our values. Like, I don't think I would have come to Ford if I didn't believe that the value structure at Ford, that the water was a little different. The common good comes up every day in what our company does. So, as Bruce Hornsby said, it's all kind of gray. It's not black and white. And for me, the common good is something that, always had that sensibility.
Thank you. Well, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being so personal about it. I appreciate that. Jim, you were talking, we've had a couple of conversations, and you were talking about, what are the big challenges for people today, especially, undergrads and grads of our schools. And what do you think some of the biggest challenges and the trends you are seeing happening in your own business, but also just kind of across culture? Because as you mentioned, AI is now involved with this, and EVs are so involved, there's so much going on.
Yeah, I guess, to make it kind of more human and back to the center of our discussion, it's like when I was growing up, we all tried to be different from each other. And now everyone wants to be the same. It seems like that is one of the most dangerous things I've ever seen in my life. Like, why do we always, like my kids, they all, YouTube, the social media, the pressure they have to be like everyone else. When I was growing up, I'm not romantic about having a paper route and any of that stuff. I don't care. I mean, I'd much rather grow up now. But there's one that I wouldn't like, which is, why are we working so hard to be like everyone, be someone else? Why can't we be working hard to be different from each other? That's what really bothers me. I see it in our employees. I see it in car companies. When I took over Ford, we were in pretty much every segment around the world. And the first thing I did was, we should just simplify the company around what we're really good at naturally. Let's stop making generic, forgettable cars that no one really cares about. Let's start getting into the business of making pickup trucks and sports cars and off-roaders and most of all work vehicles, because that's what we're good at naturally. So I believe that's like a truism in business. Why are we trying to be like someone else? Why can't we have the confidence of doing what we naturally do better than anyone else? Since that day, we were number 14 in small pickups outside of the U.S., Toyota was number one. Mitsubishi, it's a long list. 14 down, there was Ford. And today we're number two. We went from 200,000 to close to 1 million vehicles. We restructured around the world and made that bet. Retooled our factories, redid the product range, because I believed that our commercial work vehicles was something we do really well. Anyways, for my kids, I'm constantly having to remind them, could you stop trying to be like other people? Could you just listen to yourself? Just go your own way. That to me is the most dangerous thing I see in our society today.
So maybe the flip side of that, the challenges you see is, in your own career, was there any regrets that you,
A million regrets.
Maybe just pick about one or two that might be helpful for us.
I wasted a lot of time. I shouldn't have listened to my friends. I shouldn't have listened to other people. I should have gone right to what I really loved. Because if you do what you really love, it won't ever feel like a job. And I wasted time trying to make other people happy. I had this one epiphany where my dad goes, JP Morgan's a great bank. And, I try to pay for my own school. So graduate school, I could make enough money in corporate finance on Wall Street with JP Morgan that I could pay for 2 years at UCLA Business School. So I went there, and it was the worst summer of my life. I loved all the smart people I worked with. They were amazing, and they were into it. But I could never picture myself doing that. I needed to work with my hands on a product that I cared about, on a brand I care about. And so I took a different path. So I wasted time. I think the second thing is I should have been more caring. Plato has this great statement that I put on my desk now. It says, be kind because everyone is carrying a silent burden. What's your silent burden? Everyone's carrying one. So there's no room in life for jerks. Be kind. And it's not natural to be kind in business. Business actually rewards people not to be kind.
You're Catholic, you're Irish American, so I'm going to go spiritual right away on you. That's
okay. 99.2%, according to 23andMe, 99.2% Irish.
So you talked about the importance of the common good. You talked about the essential value of finding who you are and exploring your passion and giving yourself to that, and maybe, being a bit of a people pleaser, but then finding your way and learning.
No, I was the opposite people pleaser. I was brutal.
But you wanted to please your dad, right?
No? Well, yeah, that's true, early on. But then when I chose the automotive for the last 40 years, it was like I saw what we needed to do, and I ran over people to get there.
So this reminds me of a certain character that we have in our history, Father Mark and I, someone called St. Ignatius, who spent a lot of his time kind of angling for the career. He was Basque, and strong personality, and then eventually learned to find his true passion, his true love, and to be his best self, his true self, rather than try to be somebody else. The way in which Ignatius was able to do that is through this concept, this notion that in Jesuit speak we call discernment.
Yes.
How does discernment play a role in your life? How do you empower people on your teams to be discerning people in your business? How have you discovered this method of discernment in your own path, career, and what it means for you?
What a great question. So I believe your reputation, at least in business, is tied to this idea of great judgment and great judgments. Accumulation. If people look back my life in business, they'll look at all these tens of thousands of judgments I made. And you can judge whether they're right or wrong, whether it's the market or the people or whatever. And I believe that decisions, not just decisions, but judgment, should be wisely deployed. And for me, curiosity is mission critical. If you want to make, also intuition gets super undersold in our society. Like, I love Steve Jobs, not because of what he did, but because I loved that he believed in people's intuition. Intuition, I don't know, if you dissected it, it's probably more of a kind of a clinical thing than it sounds. It sounds kind of random. I don't think it's random at all. I think it's all the mistakes you made and all the things that worked well, all kind of in a big messy ball. And out of that comes these intuitions, which you almost can't even explain them, but they're very informed. The common good, your value belief, all of those go into, and your competitive spirit, which is really, I have to say, like one of the best things in life is being really competitive, as long as it doesn't hurt other people. I think judgment is something that I look for in people when I recruit them. And I look for their history of making good judgments. And I look at the complexity in which they look at judgments. If someone were to say to me, this is pretty straightforward and blah, 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 I was like, I'm super suspicious of that. Because I think most things are gray. Yeah. And actually, the interesting thing about your question is, especially with my job now, is how do you know if your judgment is right if it can only be viewed historically? Like, what if your judgment looks super unpopular in the moment, but actually history is kind to your judgment? This is a frame I always use so that I don't get contaminated by temporal things or short-term things. So I also think about making judgments through the lens of more of a longer time frame than a shorter time frame.
If I may follow up, that also means you have, in order to be able to hold on to that, you have to have that inner core, right? You have to have the sense of like, this is the expedient decision. This might be the better decision for the long haul.
Yes.
How can you help us understand how you develop that for yourself? The sense of like, I grew this, not just this intuition, but I grew this ability to not fall for the easy way out, to look at the longer perspective.
Because I've made so many mistakes. We all make. At 62 years old, it's a long freaking list. I don't like to make mistakes twice. But I've made enough mistakes that I think it talks to you. So that's a great question. I guess there's a level of uncertainty that you have to just acknowledge. So in the end, it's actually your dexterity as well that matters, at least in business, because things do change. Customers change their behavior. Look at hybrids and E-revs and all electric now. Those pesky customers. I say that in a respectful way, because they're always making different decisions than all of our corporate forecasts have. So, no, I think that centeredness is really important. But I kind of think of it as like, how do I say this in the most vulnerable way? I think I see myself in like a stumbling way. I stumble all the way through these business decisions, and I'm making mistakes the whole way. And on the surface, some people would say, mistake there, mistake there, mistake there. But actually, I'm getting better. Because I'm learning from all those, and I'm internalizing them, I'm debating them, I'm processing them all the time. And then actually, there comes a point where actually I am making better decisions than others because I stumbled and fumbled and made mistakes. So I think of mistakes as kind of more of a gift than a weakness. And cumulatively, they're a big gift.
What you described for us is a leadership version of what in spirituality, in Jesuit spirituality, we call the examen.
Yeah.
Okay.
To look back at your day, to learn and to ask for the grace to grow out of those experiences.
Toyota calls it PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. You plan something, then you do it, then you act, and then you plan, then you check it. Check how what you did and how you planned. You check that, and you analyze it, you criticize it, you throw everything against it. So you have a long list of things that weren't right, and then you react again. And it's a circle, always, forever. Yeah. A PDCA cycle, it is one of the most powerful tools in my business career. And I don't mind if people think I'm stumbling and bumbling. Over time, as long as you win the NFL championship or whatever metaphor you want to use, it doesn't matter.
You spoke about being 99.2%,
Yeah.
Dublin, Irish American. And of course, that just reminds me of the fact that comes out of a real Catholic culture. And when I talked to you in Detroit, Jim, you mentioned how important it was to be engaged with the city of Detroit, with the people of Detroit.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned, if I may say so, how you and your family are really committed, especially to the homeless, to the poor, working with Jesuits there. Can you just speak about how that is integrated into your life as a leader, a business leader, and as a man of faith, to be honest with you?
Yeah, I have to say, I find a lot of, I don't know, I don't want to be judgmental about it, but a lot of people just write big checks. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big check person, although I write checks. So when I came back to Detroit, I'm like, what am I going to do? What's going to keep me grounded? So I said, I got to volunteer my time. Not my money, my time. So I looked around. Ironically, my grandfather, who was from Detroit, who was a factory worker, employee 398 for the company, said to me, when I used to come back from Georgetown in this winter for the break, I'd go, because he was a car person, and I'd love to talk to my grandfather about cars and the industry, and then we would always volunteer with the homeless. Now, back in the 80s, homelessness was really different than today. It was like a blight. No one talked about it. You worked in a soup kitchen. That's what it was. Like, you fed people. Well, he didn't do it that way. The place I went was run by the Jesuits, and it was like they dealt with people's faith. They dealt with people's legal problems. It was like different. And I was like, wow. I remember being a young person going, oh, that's what this is about. I thought it was feeding people. No, it was feeding their soul. Not to convert them, but just to deal with them. So when I went back, I went right back to that homeless shelter. My bad words intentionally. And I met the Jesuit there, Father Tim, and I started volunteering. And after about 6 months, he figured out who I was. He was like, why are you living in downtown Detroit, and why are you here? And I said, I don't know, I just feel like this grounds me. When I go back on Monday, I'm like a better leader. And I don't, I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. So then he goes, being Jesuit he goes, we need to solve this problem. I'm like, how do you solve this problem? He goes, well, I'm going to go on a tour of the U.S. I'm going to go to every homeless place I can, and I'm going to figure out what the best do. And then I'm going to bring that back to Detroit, because if you're homeless in Detroit, and every month from December through March, at least one person dies of cold exposure. So when you're serving people food, knowing that one of the people you meet is going to die on the street, and they choose to live on the street, knowing that risk, there's something more to it than just something went wrong in their life. So he went on the tour. I gave some money, and he came back and he had all these great ideas. He goes, we got to create a transition center. We're going to get people off the street. If they want to live on the sidewalks, we're going to have heated sidewalks. If they're not ready for that, we're going to deal with their faith, their addiction, their trauma in their life. So we're going to have the best, doctors, the best medicine. We're going to deal with it all. I'm like, well, Father Tim, that sounds pretty ambitious and awesome, but like, how the heck are we going to do that? He goes, well, we need $35 million. I was like, aha, that's why you need me. So I had never done a capital campaign. I didn't know what I was doing. I literally had never raised more than a couple $1,000s. And we just finished. I went to the opening this week. We raised $37 million. And we have 100 people. We have an outpatient for the local community. It's freaking awesome. And I think really people that are homeless in Detroit, they're so far down the road of life. They have so many complicated problems that are all intertwined. Unpacking all that. And it's not about getting people inside. It's not about that at all. It's about like respecting them as people and giving them the resources they've never had so that they can kind of unpack them in their way at their time. They just have to be committed. And they have to do good work there. They have to do, their errands. They have to be committed. And so, yeah, that's what we've done. It's called the Pope Francis Center.
Yeah.
I was born in Argentina, so I kind of like the name.
That's great. Yeah, and Tim's a wonderful guy. I'm going to give the last question before we go to your questions to Quentin then.
So you've talked about, concern you have for youth this day, this concern of conformity and trying to be somebody else. What might be a hope you have for our students here at Georgetown? What you hope they can bring to the world, what you hope they can do with the gift of their education, their life? What would be one or maybe a couple of things? It's a very broad question.
So for those of you at school, I had no idea that I would have the opportunity to lead Ford. I literally had no idea. And every day is kind of like the same. So it's kind of hard to see changes. All I would say is take the risky road. Don't take the safe road. I took the risky road in a big company, so it wasn't super risky. And I was handsomely rewarded. All the gifts I got from my career were pretty much my failures and going a road that others wouldn't take because it had more risk. And I would encourage you to try to find something you love, understand that deeply, commit to it if it doesn't hurt others, and try to take as many risks as you can to contribute. And in the end, that's really what it's about. What's the intersection between what you can do for others and what others need? And I just happen to be serving others as a CEO of Ford, but you can serve others many other ways. And there's no better gift in your life than serving other people.